I never thought I'd feel this nervous walking into a repair shop, of all places. But there she was, leaning against the counter, sorting through a stack of invoices with a precision that somehow made the mundane hum with tension. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly, and I realized I was holding my jacket too tightly, my fingers brushing the leather zipper again and again. "Are you always this bold?" she said without looking up. The words hit me like a pause in a song I didn't know was playing. I froze mid-step, the wrench I was supposed to hand over to the mechanic forgotten in my grip. She finally met my eyes, sharp, curious, amused, and something in the way her brow quirked made my chest tighten. I shrugged, trying for casual, failing spectacularly. "Only when I want someone," I muttered, too softly for comfort but just loud enough to register. She let the silence hang after that, tilting her head as if studying a puzzle she already knew the answer to. I wanted to disappear behind the counter, behind the hum of the fluorescent lights, behind everything except that half-smile tugging at her lips. She didn't say anything, just handed me the invoice with a flick of her fingers, and I caught the faint scent of coffee mixed with something floral, jasmine, maybe, or a perfume I couldn't place. The shop smelled of oil and metal, of cleaning rags that had seen one too many spills. I found myself noticing the subtle contrast, her crisp blouse, the silver watch that gleamed like a secret under the harsh overhead lights, the way her hair had a controlled sheen that refused to fray despite her long hours. I wasn't supposed to be aware of her, not like this, but awareness had a way of sneaking in when someone mattered more than they should. She laughed softly at something the mechanic muttered under his breath, and I realized I had been holding my breath, waiting for some cue to leave, to speak, to do anything. The laugh stayed with me, echoing in my chest long after it was gone, leaving a warmth that I couldn't shake. I handed her the wrench, too aware of how my fingers brushed hers, and she didn't flinch. That small contact, a fleeting brush of skin, felt like an invitation wrapped in a question I didn't dare answer yet. She gave me that glance again, sharp, knowing, but quiet, as though she was teasing me without speaking. And then she turned to the register, tapping at the keys with a calm efficiency that made me feel like a storm trapped inside a cup. I lingered near the counter, pretending to check my phone, but my eyes kept finding her. The tilt of her shoulder, the way her mouth moved when she muttered under her breath, the soft sigh that escaped when she finally leaned back for a fraction of a second. Walking out, I told myself it was nothing, that I was imagining things. But I kept replaying her words in my head, that question and that silence. Something had shifted in the air, something electric, almost dangerous in its subtlety. And I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd looked at me, just for a moment, and how I wanted to see it again. The next time I saw her, it was at the bookstore she managed, a small, slightly dusty place that smelled of paper and tea. I was helping her rearrange some shelves, though mostly I stood there, pretending to know something about the new fiction releases while sneaking glances at her. She moved through the stacks with effortless control, but her shoulders sagged just slightly when she reached for a box of returned books. The faint crease between her brows told me she hadn't slept well, probably another long night at the shop, or something else she refused to share. I felt a quiet tug in my chest, a gentle pull I couldn't name. "Careful with that," she said softly, her tone clipped but not unkind. Her hands trembled for a moment as she lifted a stack of heavy hardcover books, and I realized she was tired enough to be vulnerable, something she didn't show often. I stepped closer, offering a hand. She hesitated, eyes flicking to mine for just a heartbeat. I could see the conflict there, pride, fatigue, and something else I couldn't quite place. Finally, she let me take the edge of the box. Our fingers brushed briefly, too brief for comfort, too long to dismiss. As we worked, I noticed the small things. The way her laugh was soft and restrained, as if she didn't trust it could fill a room without consequence. The faint scar along the side of her hand, which she covered with her watch but didn't try to hide completely. The subtle shift of her weight, the way she leaned just slightly away when I offered help, yet never enough to be distant. Every tiny gesture felt weighted, like a language only I was allowed to read. "You're too careful," I said, nodding at her hands. You handle everything like it might break." She paused, glancing at me with a brief flicker of something. Embarrassment, maybe, or the tiniest hint of longing. "Some things are supposed to break," she said quietly, almost to herself, then quickly corrected. "I mean, not everything. Just you know." I wanted to ask what she meant, but I didn't. Some things felt sacred, and I had learned to wait. Instead, I smiled, letting her words hang in the air. For a moment, we worked in silence, the soft scrape of books and the hum of the old air conditioner filling the space between us. And then, as I adjusted a stack on the top shelf, our eyes met. She didn't look away. The way she held my gaze was calm yet charged, like the air before a summer storm, and I felt a pull that had nothing to do with logic. When I left that day, I walked out into the fading light feeling both weightless and tethered, thinking about the small tremble in her hands, the guarded smile, and the quiet way she let me see her. Not all of her, but enough to make me ache. And somewhere deep down, I knew I would go back just to feel that invisible pull again. It was late, almost too late for anyone to be in the office, but we stayed behind to finish inventory. Rain streaked the windows, tapping a staccato rhythm against the glass, and the fluorescent lights cast a pale glare on the stacks of paperwork between us. The quiet made everything sharper. The tilt of her head, the way her hand lingered on a folder longer than necessary, the slight catch in her breath when she realized I was standing closer than usual. "I don't know why I let you do this," she muttered, sorting receipts with meticulous care. Her tone was half irritation, half. I couldn't place it. Vulnerability, maybe, hidden in the tremor of her voice. "You trust me more than you think," I said softly, leaning over the desk to adjust a paper she'd nudged into a crooked stack. Our hands brushed. Again, the contact lingered for a second longer than it should, and I felt my pulse spike, aware of the warmth, the softness of her skin against mine. She glanced up, eyes meeting mine, and held them. Just a moment, long enough for unspoken words to hang in the air. I wanted to say something, wanted to close the distance, but my chest tightened at the thought of crossing a line I wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. So I stayed, frozen in the middle of the office, pretending to straighten papers while stealing glances at her. Then her phone buzzed sharply against the desk. She glanced at the screen, a shadow passing over her face. X. I caught the flicker of discomfort, the subtle tension as she debated whether to answer. She ignored it, sliding the phone face down, but the interruption was enough to fracture the fragile moment we had built. "You should take a break," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Maybe get some coffee? Or whatever helps." She hesitated, eyes flicking away from mine for just a heartbeat. Then a wry smile, brief and fleeting. "You're awfully considerate for someone who shows up in my office at midnight." I wanted to laugh, to admit I wasn't being considerate at all, that my entire reason for being there was her. But I swallowed the words, forcing a casual shrug. The room felt smaller, tighter, as though the air itself conspired to make every glance and every gesture feel like a confession. We returned to the paperwork, sitting side by side. Our knees brushed under the table, an electric reminder that the distance we maintained was barely enough. The rain intensified outside, drumming on the roof, as if nature itself wanted to drown out our hesitation. I could feel her tension, the barely controlled tremor in her hand as she turned a page. And then, in one fleeting moment, I imagined leaning closer, letting my lips brush hers, not demanding, not rushing, but just close enough to see if she wanted the same. I could see it in her eyes, the same thought mirrored back, if only for a heartbeat. The moment passed. A loud crash of thunder startled us both. She jumped slightly, and I cleared my throat, stepping back, letting the unspoken dissolve into the sound of rain. But the image lingered. I couldn't stop seeing the curve of her shoulder under the dim light, the brush of her hand against mine, the almost confession hanging like smoke between us. We sat across from each other in the small cafe she liked, the one with chipped mugs and a faint smell of vanilla and roasted beans. Outside, the world was gray, drizzle falling in thin sheets against the windows. Inside, there was only the low hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cutlery, but somehow it felt impossibly loud between us. I watched her stir her coffee, slow, almost mechanical. Her eyes didn't meet mine, fixed somewhere past my shoulder, lost in thought. I wanted to ask what she was thinking, but even that seemed too dangerous. The air was taut, and I could feel it pressing in from every side, making my chest ache with a quiet urgency. Finally, she spoke, her voice low, unsteady in a way I had never heard before. "What are we doing?" The question landed like a stone thrown into a still pond, sending ripples across everything I thought I knew. I swallowed, trying to find something, anything, to say, but the truth was messy and unformed. My usual confidence faltered in the weight of her eyes. I don't know," I admitted finally, my voice barely above the hum of the cafe. "I don't know if we're supposed to be here." She looked at me then, fully, and it was like being caught in a storm you can't see coming. There was fear there, yes, but also a fragile honesty I hadn't earned. She let the silence stretch, let the words hang, and in that pause, I realized we could no longer pretend this was normal. Not anymore. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. A tremor ran through her hand, small but unmistakable. I wanted to reach out, to touch, to steady her, but I stayed still. We didn't need touch to communicate. It would have ruined the moment. Our silence said everything we hadn't dared to speak. "I keep thinking," she murmured, more to herself than to me, "about what we're doing. About me." Her lips pressed together, tight, as if trying to stop herself from saying more. But I could see it, the vulnerability she carried like a fragile shield, the tension in her jaw, the slight quiver in her throat. "I know," I whispered, though it felt too small to carry the weight of the room. "I feel it too." For a long moment, we just looked at each other. The drizzle outside softened to a drizzle of quiet thoughts and unsaid confessions. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the self-restraint, the longing she didn't allow herself to voice. And I knew she felt the same pull I did, the magnetic draw that neither of us could name. Finally, she leaned back, letting out a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. I don't want to ruin anything," she said, voice breaking just enough to expose the raw edge beneath. And in that instant, all the restraint, all the careful boundaries we'd maintained, shattered, not with an embrace or a word of love, but with the devastating honesty of her confession. I couldn't stop staring, and in the silence that followed, I realized she had just given me a piece of herself I wasn't sure I could ever deserve. She didn't speak right away. We were in her apartment, the air warm from the space heater, but heavy with the unspoken. I was helping her move a box from the closet, mostly just standing there, holding it awkwardly while she shuffled papers and old photographs. Then she stopped, holding a folded envelope like it was fragile enough to break in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, and for the first time, I saw a crack in her composure. This was from him," she said softly, almost afraid I would ask who. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. The man she had loved and lost, decades ago, still lingered in the folds of her life, in this single envelope. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, hands full of cardboard and hesitation, and watched her wrestle with memories she hadn't shared with anyone in years. "He left," she whispered, almost to herself, voice tight. Not in anger, just gone. She looked up at me then, the faint sheen of tears catching the light. And I never really got over it, you know? I pretended I had. I swallowed, unsure if it was my place to respond. But something in her made me speak anyway. "I know what it's like," I said quietly. "To hold someone in your head long after they're gone. To keep seeing them in pieces of everyone else." Her gaze lingered on me, the faintest flicker of recognition passing between us, as if I had reached into a part of her she rarely let anyone touch. The envelope trembled in her hands, and I saw her fighting the pull of the past, trying to stay anchored in the present. I wanted to say more, to tell her that she didn't have to carry it alone, that I could listen, that I could be something she hadn't expected. But the words stuck in my throat. So I stayed, silent, letting her talk through the space that neither of us could fill with cliches or reassurances. Then she smiled, small, almost apologetic. "You remind me of someone I lost," she said, voice cracking in a way that left the room raw. "Not him exactly, just the way you notice things, the way you care without asking for anything in return. It's unsettling." I felt a jolt in my chest, a mixture of shame and hope, and I realized that what she had just said wasn't about comparison. It was about recognition, about seeing herself reflected in someone she didn't expect. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hiss of the heater, the soft shuffle of paper. And then she placed the envelope on the table between us, hands lingering just slightly over it, as if asking permission without words. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second, the past, the present, and the possibility of something unspoken collided in the quiet. My chest tightened. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I just whispered, almost to myself, "You don't have to do this alone." And she gave me a look, soft, tremulous, almost broken, that made my heart feel both heavy and strangely full. A single, delicate shift in her gaze, and the world between us had changed forever. The next evening, we found ourselves in the quiet of her apartment again. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, softer this time, almost apologetic. She was folding laundry, an ordinary task made intimate by the small closeness of our presence. I sat on the edge of the couch, knees pressed together, pretending to read a book I wasn't really seeing. She glanced up at me, that half-smile that never reached her eyes fully, until now. "You're still here," she said softly, though her tone didn't hold surprise. More like expectation. "I didn't leave," I said, shrugging, but the words felt like both confession and relief. The silence stretched between us, comfortable and tense at once. I watched the way her fingers moved over the fabric, small, deliberate movements that mirrored the care she applied to everything in her life. And I noticed how tired she looked, how the faint shadows under her eyes made her seem more human, more vulnerable, and somehow more alive. She set the last folded shirt aside and leaned against the counter, shoulders sagging slightly. I could see the weight of the past weeks, months, maybe years, pressing down on her. Without thinking, I stood and crossed the room, stopping just short of where she was. Our eyes met, and for a heartbeat, the world outside ceased to exist. She didn't pull away. I didn't move closer. There was no rush, no grand gesture. Just presence, just acknowledgement, just the quiet understanding that we had passed some invisible line, one neither of us had named, but both had felt. I reached out, almost hesitantly, and brushed my fingers against hers. She didn't flinch. Instead, she let her hand rest against mine for a moment, tentative, exploring the new reality between us. The touch was small, almost insignificant to anyone else, but to us it carried all the weight of unspoken confessions, long nights of longing, and the slow collapse of restraint. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. The sound of her breathing, the faint hum of the heater, the distant city lights filtering through the blinds, it was enough. The space between us, once charged and precarious, had settled into something steady, undeniable. I realized then that this wasn't about grand declarations or fairy tale endings. It was about the small inevitabilities, the quiet collapses, the acknowledgement that some connections refuse to be denied. She tilted her head slightly, and our fingers entwined naturally, almost instinctively. No words, no promises, just a simple alignment of presence. I rested my forehead lightly against hers, closing my eyes for a brief moment, letting the world shrink to that single, shared heartbeat. When I opened them, she was watching me with that same fragile, honest look that had first drawn me in. And I knew, without needing to say it aloud, that this, us, here, now, was enough. The rain softened outside, the apartment settled into a quiet calm, and I felt, finally, that some small part of the storm inside us had found rest. No declarations, no grand gestures, just the weight of presence and the quiet finality of being exactly where we were meant to be. Looking back now, I realize how quietly everything shifted, not with a bang or a dramatic confession, but in the subtle, almost imperceptible moments, the brush of her hand against mine, the way her eyes lingered when she thought I wasn't looking, the silences that said more than words ever could. I've changed. I notice things differently now, the little details that make people human, fragile, beautiful. I've learned patience isn't just waiting. It's understanding, it's presence, it's letting someone arrive at their own truth without rushing them. And I've learned that sometimes love isn't about fireworks or perfect timing. It's about the quiet acceptance of someone as they are, scars and tremors included. She's changed too. I see it in the calm confidence she carries now, in the way she lets herself linger in a moment instead of fleeing from it, in the way she trusts me, not with everything, but with enough to make the space between us a place of safety. She laughs more freely, but still with that careful edge that makes it achingly real. We didn't arrive here with guarantees or tidy resolutions. There were still questions left unasked, moments we almost crossed, and silent acknowledgments that some things remain unresolved. But the essence of what matters, the connection, the understanding, the unspoken recognition of each other, remains. And that, I think, is enough. Sometimes I catch myself remembering the first time I saw her, the way she leaned against that counter like the world weighed too much to stand upright. And I smile quietly, because even then, the spark was there, subtle, unrelenting, waiting for the right time. Love, I've learned, doesn't always announce itself. It slips in slowly, often unnoticed, until one day you realize it has become the rhythm of your life. The laughter in quiet rooms, the half-smile across a crowded space, the gentle pull of presence when everything else fades away. That is what we found. Not perfection, but something warmer, steadier, real. And I think that's what makes it worth holding on to. Not the drama, not the fireworks, not the imagined endings, but the persistence of connection, of attention, of someone noticing you fully and choosing to stay. So, if you're still with me at the end of this story, I want to leave you with this. Notice the small things, the quiet gestures, the almost invisible moments that make someone matter. Because sometimes that is love, and sometimes it's all you need. What small moments in your own life have left you feeling quietly undone or unexpectedly found? Pause, reflect, and maybe even share, because connection, in any form, is worth it.